Is it better to be loved or feared? Niccolò Machiavelli asked this question over 500 years ago in The Prince, and the fact that we still debate it today tells you something. This is not about kings, it's about power. In relationships, in business, in leadership, in social circles, every person in a position of influence eventually faces this choice. Should I prioritize being liked or being respected? And Machiavelli's answer was disturbingly simple. Ideally, both. But if you must choose, it is safer to be feared, not because fear is noble, because fear is reliable. Love changes, fear calculates. Love withdraws when inconvenient. Fear stays when consequences are clear. This makes people uncomfortable, because we're taught that being loved is the goal, that affection equals success, that being liked means you're doing it right. But Machiavelli watched leaders rise and fall based on this exact miscalculation. The ones who prioritized being loved became dependent on approval, and when approval disappeared, so did their power. The ones who understood fear, who built structure instead of chasing affection, lasted, not because they were cruel, because they were clear. The question is not which feels better. The question is which holds when pressure arrives, and pressure always arrives. Love feels powerful. People smile at you, they support you, they praise you. But love is emotional currency, and emotion fluctuates. Machiavelli observed something most people refuse to admit. Human beings are loyal when it benefits them. They admire you while you are useful. They support you while you are generous. They stay close while you are convenient. But the moment serving you costs them something, affection fades, because love is voluntary. And what is voluntary can be withdrawn without warning. That is its weakness. Prioritize being liked above everything. Prioritize being liked above everything else. What happens when you can't give anymore? When you set a boundary? When you say no? The love evaporates. And when that role stops serving them, they move on, without guilt, without explanation, without hesitation. Because love, real or imagined, was never the foundation. Benefit was. Machiavelli wasn't being cynical. He was being observational. He watched people swear loyalty to leaders they loved, and then abandon those same leaders the moment staying became costly. The affection was real in the moment, but it wasn't durable, because emotion alone cannot survive pressure. When fear is absent, when there's no consequence to leaving, people leave. Not dramatically. Quietly. They drift. They distance. They find new sources of what you used to provide. And you're left wondering what you did wrong. You did nothing wrong. You just built on affection instead of structure. And affection, without consequence, is not enough. Fear is different. Fear does not depend on mood. Fear depends on consequence. When people understand that crossing you has a cost, their behavior becomes predictable. They think twice. They calculate. They restrain themselves. Machiavelli was not advocating cruelty. He was advocating clarity. If your boundaries carry no consequences, they are not boundaries. They are suggestions, and suggestions are ignored. Fear, properly applied, creates structure, not terror, not intimidation. Structure. People know what happens if they violate your boundaries. They know access to you is conditional. They know disrespect is not tolerated. And that knowledge shapes behavior. not because they're scared of you, because they understand the framework. Cross this line, lose access, disrespect this boundary, face distance, violate this trust, experience consequence. It's not emotional, it's mechanical, and mechanics are reliable. Love asks, do they like me enough to stay? Fear asks, do they understand what happens if they don't? One is based on hope, the other on clarity, and clarity always wins. Because people will tolerate discomfort to avoid consequence, but they won't tolerate discomfort just to maintain affection. Affection is optional. Consequence is not. That's why fear is stable. It's not asking people to feel a certain way. It's creating a structure they understand. And structure, unlike emotion, does not fluctuate. But Machiavelli added a warning that many forget. A ruler must avoid being hated. Fear without hatred is control. Fear mixed with humiliation becomes rebellion. When people feel unjustly harmed, their survival instinct activates. They don't just disobey. They wait, they plot, they look for your weakness. So the goal is not intimidation. The goal is predictable consequence, calm, measured, controlled, never emotional, never excessive. This is the nuance most people miss. Machiavelli was not saying be a tyrant. He was saying be consistent. Fear becomes hatred when it's arbitrary, when it's cruel, when it humiliates. When people feel you're punishing them unfairly, when consequences seem personal or vindictive, when you cross into cruelty, you create enemies. And enemies don't just leave. They undermine. They sabotage. They wait for the right moment. But fear that's fair, that's proportional, that's predictable, creates respect. People understand the rules. They know what triggers consequence. They can choose to comply or accept the cost. That's not tyranny. That's structure. The difference is intention. Are you creating consequence to protect your boundaries or to hurt someone? Are you enforcing standards consistently or selectively based on mood? Are you calm when delivering consequence or emotional and excessive? Those distinctions matter. Fair fear is respected. Unfair fear is resented. And resentment, once it builds, becomes dangerous. So Machiavelli's lesson was never be cruel. It was be clear and be fair. Create structure. Enforce it consistently. Never make it personal. That's the line, and it must never be crossed. You are not a king, but you operate in hierarchies every day. At work, in friendships, in romantic relationships. If you are too agreeable, you are tested. If you are overly forgiving, you are exploited. If you tolerate disrespect to keep the peace, you lose leverage. Modern fear does not mean yelling. It means you do not over-explain. You do not chase. You do not tolerate repeated violations. You withdraw access when necessary. People adjust quickly when access to you becomes conditional. That is structured fear. Think about your relationships right now. Who tests your boundaries? Who takes more than they give? Who disrespects you subtly but consistently? And ask yourself, what consequence have I created? If the answer is none, if you're just hoping they'll change, hoping affection will correct behavior, you're building on sand. Because without consequence, there's no incentive to change. Modern fear is not aggression. It's withdrawal. Someone disrespects you repeatedly. You stop being available. Someone takes advantage. You stop offering. Someone crosses a boundary. You create distance. No drama, no explanation, no anger, just consequence. And that consequence teaches faster than any conversation ever could, because people don't change from words, they change from results. When being close to you requires respecting you, people either respect you or leave. Both outcomes serve you. Either the relationship improves because boundaries are finally honored, or it ends because it was never sustainable. That's not coldness, that's clarity. And clarity is what most relationships lack. People stay in dynamics where they're disrespected because they're afraid of being disliked, afraid of conflict, afraid of being alone. So they tolerate and hope and wait for change that never comes. But structure ends that cycle. You stop hoping. You start enforcing. And enforcement changes everything. So is it better to be loved or feared? The real answer is this. Be the kind of person whose absence creates tension, whose standards are known, whose reactions are controlled, whose boundaries are firm but fair. You don't need to intimidate. You don't need to dominate. You simply need to be someone people understand they cannot play with. Because affection is emotional, but consequence is structural, and structure outlasts emotion every time. Most people choose love because it feels safer, because it avoids conflict, because it's easier in the moment. But love without structure collapses under pressure. The moment you can't give what people want, the moment you set a boundary, the moment you're no longer convenient, that love disappears, and you're left with nothing. But structure? Structure holds. People might not always like you, but they respect you, they understand you, they know where they stand. And that respect, that clarity, creates something deeper than affection. It creates trust. Not the shallow trust of convenience, the deep trust of consistency. People know you won't tolerate disrespect, so they don't disrespect you. People know your boundaries are real, so they honor them. People know access to you is earned, so they value it. That's not fear in the terrifying sense. That's fear in the respectful sense. The understanding that you are not to be taken lightly, that your presence is not guaranteed, that your tolerance has limits. And that understanding creates the foundation for everything else. Love built on structure lasts. Love built on indulgence crumbles. Respect first, then affection. Standards before warmth. Consequence before connection. That's Machiavelli's lesson. Not because he was cold, because he was realistic. He saw what worked, what lasted, what survived pressure. And it was never pure affection. It was always structure with the possibility of affection, fear as foundation, love as reward, not the other way around.